Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I don't want you to be... All right. I'm Jim Wharton with the Brockport Writers Forum. Some of you know we've been bringing writers to this campus for... You need louder or quieter? Thank you for saying that. Let's get this right before we go on. How's this? Okay. Everyone in back can hear me okay? Louder? How's this? Okay, the expert's coming down to help it. Guess what I've been doing for the last year and a half? Zoom. Okay. I would say you're probably on the wrong. Yeah, somebody said it was echoing.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. How about now?
Thanks. See, we tested this before you all got here, but having 300 people in the room changes things. I'm really glad y'all are here. Some of you know that we've been bringing writers to Brockport and to Rochester for over 50 years now, and as I was saying, I've been Zooming for a year, and I'm really happy to be back live and in person with Robin Wall Kimmerer tonight. And it's challenging times. Thank you guys for having your masks on. I'm going to put mine back on in just a second. I think I know a few of you are visiting our campus for the first time tonight. So welcome to SUNY Brockport. Welcome to the village of Brockport in New York on the Erie Canal, in a place that before the village was here, before SUNY was here, before the canal was here, we know was home to the Onondaga Nation, also known as the Seneca Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I'm thankful that we're all here together tonight. It's a group effort, and I want to especially thank our friends, Writers in Books of Rochester, with whom we are co-sponsoring this event. Particular thanks to Allison Myers, Karen Van Meenen, and Chris Fanning for making this event happen tonight. Thanks also to Mike Smith, you just met Mike, and Nico Korick, who are managing the live stream, and hi to folks out in the world who are watching this on the internet tonight. I also want to thank our friends John and Sarah Bonzik from Lift Bridge Books, our local independent bookseller. Indie bookseller on Main Street in the village at Brockport. You pass their table on the way into the building, right by the door, and if you'd like to get a book after the reading, you'll have time to do that again before the signing. I'm going to get out of the way in just a minute. I just want to tell you quickly about our format tonight. Professor Kimmerer will speak for about 45 minutes or so, and after that, we'll have about 15 minutes for questions. We want to do this carefully, so the way I'm going to ask you to ask questions is we'll line up in this aisle over here, and you'll be able to ask a question at that microphone. And then after the question and answer period, about 15 minutes, we'll have the book signing. Robin will be here at this table, and again, I'm going to ask you to line up in this far aisle, and because of COVID, we've planned a system to allow us to keep some distance between each other. So a member of our staff will come down the line with some Post-it notes, and you can write an inscription write your name on the Post-it note. We'll put it in the book, and then there will be someone to hand your book to, and that person will hand it to Robin, and we'll keep the line moving that way. So please come down the line this way, and then we'll go back up this way. And again, thank you for your understanding. I'm so glad to be back in person in this room with all of you guys tonight. It's different, but thanks for thinking of each other. I'm going to hand it over now to Karen Van Meenen, Director of Community Reading Programs at Writers and Books.
How's that sound? Welcome to the 20th year of Rochester Reads. After a year's hiatus, we have returned and are particularly excited to share this year's book with all of you. We are grateful to the College at Brockport, the generous sponsor of this evening's event, and to Professor Jim Wharton. It takes a village to deliver the dozens of events that make up a month of Rochester Reads activities. And I wanted to point out we have some truly special programs running into November this year, including a tour of Rochester's own and only old-growth forest, and a panel on reciprocity and how we can bring the ideas of braiding sweetgrass into our individual lives going forward. This year, 24 libraries, institutions, and nature and cultural sites, as well as over 20 sponsors, funders, and supporters, partnered with us to make this unique region-wide program a reality for the 20th time. Special thanks to the Writers and Books Board and the fabulous Writers and Books staff. And I wanted to shout out to our interpreters as well, who helped to make this more accessible. We are indebted to you all, and as Jim said, thank you so much for being back in person. And now to our main event. Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants, is a botanist whose connection to the earth she studies and walks on began many generations before she was born. Like Sky Woman, who descended to what became Turtle Island in the legend that begins braiding sweetgrass, Kimmerer passes on gifts of soil and seed and song and weaves for us a tapestry of both science and imagination, a cloth of creativity and connections between mothers and daughters, moss and stones, trees and air and roots, plants and water, humans and animals and the earth, and between the colors of aster and goldenrod, even between college student and cattail. These inextricable bonds are reflected in her clear prose, her infectious enthusiasm, and above all, her generous sharing of both her gained knowledge and her innate wisdom. When I first read Braiding Sweetgrass a couple of years ago, not even thinking about Rochester Reads, I was enthralled by its overarching narrative, from the movement of its most molecular examinations to the global possibilities of a reimagined future. Like the sacred act of the title, Kimmerer braids our shared story. She encourages us, she entices us, she implores us to look, and more importantly, a la Thoreau, to see, so that we may live, even thrive, on this earth, not apart, but as one interdependent and mutually supportive whole. Kimmerer writes, "Science gives us knowing, but caring is something else." In Braiding Sweetgrass, Kimmerer has demystified scientific thinking and processes for her readers, entwining them in her human fascination with being on the land, being with and a part of nature. But she also teaches us how to care. She fine-tunes the definition of what it means to be honorable and expands our concepts of personhood. For Kimmerer, gratitude is not merely a platitude, and reciprocity is a way of life. We have so much to learn from her as a scholar and as a writer, but more importantly, from her expansive worldview, one that is capable of sustaining life in all of its tangible physical forms, as well as its magical manifestations. After all, as she writes, what happens to one happens to all. We can starve together or feast together. All flourishing is mutual. Kimmerer ends Braiding Sweetgrass with words that are particularly resonant in these challenging times of social distancing and expressed and insidious fears of the other. Quote, Whatever our gift, we are called to give it and to dance for the renewal of the world in return for the privilege of breath. Please welcome Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Bonjour, Ani. Shabadaske gish kokwe nadeshnakas. Bodwe wad mekwenda. Megazedo dem, midwa makodo dem. Anishnabe, Syracuse, New York, nadoch bia. Migwech kinagego gamijong. I don't speak much of my beautiful Potawatomi language. I'm just a beginner. But our language is an endangered species, and our teachers ask us to breathe life into it whenever we have the opportunity. So I am grateful to share those words with you. And I also want to say thank you for those wonderful, generous, warm introductions, and that we can all be here together through the agency of all of your efforts, including your efforts just to be here tonight. This is my first in-person event in, 19 months? And so I'm glad it's here with you. It is also part of Potawatomi protocol that we always begin with gratitude. And so I would ask that we cast our minds back to this morning when our feet first touched Mother Earth, and to remember that we had everything that we need. That first drink of water, the breath of the morning, the smell of that morning air, the companionship of clouds and geese moving through the sky, the companionship of one another, and of course, the more than human beings who are around us at all times. I also want to give gratitude to the first peoples of these places. I live in Onondaga, contemporary and ancestral territory, to whom we owe an unpaid debt of land and history, and certainly of knowledge of how it is that we care for the earth. Let me see if I can see the keyboard for you. Yep, there we go. A basket of berries, what a gift. But you know, much of the society that we live in would call these miracles, these berries, natural resources, as if they were our property just waiting for us to transform them into something useful. In the ecological sciences, we might call them ecosystem services, as if they were some inevitable outcome of the ecological machine. But to traditional people, we know them as gifts. Gifts from our relatives, the plants who surround us. And you know, though every one of us lives in a world that is made of gifts, we are showered with gifts. We find ourselves harnessed to institutions and to economies that are relentlessly asking, what more can we take from the earth? And I think that the question that we need is, what does the earth ask of us? Sorry? Oh, thank you. Is that better? Oh, good. Please let me know if, yeah, okay. Thank you. It seems to me that for the past couple of centuries, which is honestly just an eye blink of time in the history of our species, we have been doing an unintended experiment that has very tangible manifestations. We've unwittingly asked, what would happen if we believed in this pyramid of human exceptionalism? What if a single species out of the millions that inhabit the planet was somehow more deserving of the richness of the earth than any other? And not only that, that this experiment, all the ecological laws that constrain growth and consumption somehow don't apply to us at the top of that pyramid, as if the laws of thermodynamics were repealed just on our behalf. This experiment also tests the hypothesis of what would happen if we behaved as if the Earth was nothing more than stuff. This strictly materialist, utilitarian natural resources view of the Earth, and moreover, that all that stuff belonged to us. Well, I think we can agree that the results of that experiment are in. We find ourselves teetering at the edge of a precipice of climate chaos, entering what evolutionary biologists are calling the age of the sixth extinction. The Earth is asking us to change. And yet much of our environmental discourse is all about changing light bulbs. You know, don't get me wrong, new technologies will be an important response. But as a scientist, I don't think that it's only new technology that we need, only new policy, or even more money. If we are to survive, and if our more than human relatives are to survive with us as well, we need to change a lot more than light bulbs. We need a change in worldview. From a worldview that thinks about lands as capital, as natural resources, as property. This really important notion, because property is a bundle of rights, isn't it? Exclusive rights that we say we have rights to this land. We sometimes also think about land as ecosystem services, the utilitarian view of who land is. What do we change? To a worldview that understands that the land is the source of our identity, that the land sustains us in every single way, that it is not only our home, but the home of our more than human relatives as well. Land is the place that we connect to our ancestors, the ones who cleared the path that we might be here, and we connect to our descendants, that we clear the path for them. Land is understood as our teacher, as our library, as our source of knowledge. Land is also the pharmacy, our healer for both spirit and matter. Because the land is inspirited, because the land is our home, it is not a source of belongings, but the place where we belong. And instead of thinking about land as rights to land, in the indigenous worldview, we think about land as the place that we have responsibility for. Rights cultures, responsibility cultures, very different. And the land understood as sacred. I think that we are living in an era of profound error. For much of humans' time on the planet before the Great Delusion, we lived in cultures that understood ourselves not as masters of the universe, but as the younger brothers of creation, say my Haudenosaunee neighbors. And the scientific worldview, which has so dominated our landscape, almost like a monoculture for the last 500 years, has yielded tremendous gains in the quality of human life and our understanding without question. It's brought huge advances in knowledge, but right at this moment, I am not convinced it's more knowledge that we need. It's more wisdom. And generating wisdom is simply not within the purview of Western science. We need a science that draws upon intellect, yes, the mind, the body, but also includes values in emotion and spirit. We need traditional ecological knowledge and the holism that it represents. Traditional ecological knowledge is based not on the pyramid, but on the circle. It's based on the recognition that we humans are not atop that pyramid. We're members of a democracy of species governed by laws of interdependence. And you know, this time that we are living in, of great change, and certainly of great choices, has been spoken of by our ancestors in the teachings of the prophecy of the seventh fire. It's a long story, an important one. I can share just a tiny fragment of it with you this evening. It is a story, the seventh fires refer to 7 eras in the history of our people and where our council fires were. It's the history of the migration of the Anishinaabe peoples, to which the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and the Odawa all belong. It is a story both of tragedy and of courageous resilience. It is a story that says that when we lived with our relatives on the East Coast and with our Wabanaki relatives, a teacher arose among the people who said, to safeguard the sacred fire, some of us were going to have to move to the west. And they said, follow the shell until you go to the west, to the place where the food grows on the water. The 7 fires talk about how in each of these eras, a teacher arose who said, in this time, these things will befall our people. The loss of the land, the loss of language, a time when the sacred teachings of our people were disrupted, the loss of each other. All of these prophecies became the history of our people. It is also said that there will come a time when all the world's people will find that they can no longer dip a cup into a stream and drink, when the air becomes too thick to breathe, and when the plants and animals begin to turn their faces away from us. It is said that in that time we will know this is the time of the 7th fire, and that we will all stand together, you and me, all the world's people, will stand at a fork in the road. We know that we do. And in my imagination, one of those paths is soft and green and all spangled with dew, and you could walk barefoot there. And one of the paths is black and burnt, made of cinders that would cut your feet. The prophecy tells us that we have to make a choice between the path of materialism and greed that will destroy the earth, and the spiritual path of care and compassion, of bemadiziwin, of the balance of a good life. And we know what we want, but we are told that we can't just walk forward. The people of the 7th fire must instead turn around and walk backwards and pick up what was left for us along the ancestors' path. The stories, the teachings, the songs, each other, our plant and animal relatives who were lost along the way, and our language. And only when we have found these things and picked them up and placed them in our bundles, those things that will heal us, then we can walk forward on that green path. These are the questions that we face today, all of us at that crossroads. What do we find along our ancestors' path that will heal us and bring us back to balance? The question that is so often on my mind is, what do we love too much to lose, that we will pick it up, put it in our bundles, and carry it through the narrows of climate change, safely to the other side? Because there is another side. The prophecy tells us the people of the 7th fire will need great courage and creativity and wisdom, but that they will lead us to the lighting of the 8th fire. It's said that we, right now, are the people of the 7th fire. We're the ones who can propel that transformation. And one of the things that we have to pick up along the path to go forward together are the stories and the teachings. And I don't know about you, but faced with the urgency of this moment, I long for a teacher. I long for a teacher like Sky Woman. But you know, Sky Woman left us our teachers. She brought them with us, those wise grandmothers who could guide us in this perilous time to find that good path. Because in many Indigenous traditions, the plants are understood as our oldest teachers. They have been here on earth far longer than we have, and they embody the virtues that we honor. Who better to look to for guidance than those who can take light and air and water and make it into food and then give it away for free? Who makes medicines and distributes them for free? Their numbers include the oldest, the largest, the most powerful of all of our relatives. We might do well to look to the plants for guidance. Now, what if you were a teacher, a keeper of great knowledge, but had no voice to speak it, and had no pen to write it, and yet there was something important that you needed to say? Plants tell their stories not by what they say, but by what they do. And the name for plants in Potawatomi language reminds us of this. The plants collectively are known as mishkikin. Mishkikin is our word for medicine. All the plants are understood as medicine. But even more importantly, the etymology of that word mishkikin, it means the strength of the earth. We will be healed by the medicine is to say we will be healed by the strength of the earth. And in this year, which is the warmest ever recorded, when glaciers are melting, storms rising, and hundreds of our fellow species are in grave danger, it's important to remember that we don't have to innovate our way out of this dilemma alone. We have our teachers. In the Indigenous paradigm, knowledge arises from multiple sources. And one of the hallmarks of Indigenous science is learning from intelligences other than our own. And this is grounded in the understanding of the personhood of all beings, the intelligence of the land. And very forward-thinking scientists have a parallel so-called new area of study based on accessing the intelligence of nature for design, for engineering, for environmental problem solving. And this new discipline, termed biomimicry, is this notion that we could learn from the living world and adopt those solutions for our own questions. Predictably, though, the science of biomimicry is so far restricted to learning what new products we might make. What interests me is what they might teach us about how we could live. If plants are our teachers in this time of crisis, what could they teach us about responding to climate change if we were willing to listen and to learn? Plants know what to know about climate change. They are not dithering in ineffectual meetings and debating carbon tax policy. They are just getting to work. They could be a model for the transformation that we need. I mean, think about it. They have already converted completely to a solar economy. Now, you have probably heard that entrepreneur Richard Branson has established the Virgin Earth Challenge. This is a prize, a competition to spur the design of new technology that would remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it while we are transforming to a fossil fuel-free economy. It's a lofty goal. It's critical deployment of human ingenuity on behalf of the climate, and the prize is $25 million. Human ingenuity is certainly going to be part of the solution. But I think we should keep in mind that there already is a system that can pull carbon from the atmosphere, stores it for centuries, and even has more bells and whistles. You know what? It generates It generates oxygen, builds soil, protects biodiversity, and purifies water all at the same time while making us happy and peaceful. It's called a forest. And I say give the prize to the trees. Yeah, to the trees. Because plants don't put CO2 into the atmosphere, they take it out. sequester it in long-term storage in the bodies of tree trunks, in 12-foot deep roots of prairie grass, in the deep bogs of peat, in the organic matter of rich, fertile soils. Because after all, what are coal and oil but the stored carbon of prehistoric plants? The plants stored away all that carbon, kept it out of the atmosphere, until we decided to rip open the earth and burn up eons of stored fossil carbon in just a few centuries. Plants have been sequestering carbon since the beginning, removing it from the air. Let's follow their lead and join the movement to keep it in the ground. What do plants do when the climate changes? One of the things they do is to grow faster. When there's more carbon dioxide through the carbon dioxide fertilization effect, for a short time, they can actually grow faster. But hard as they might try, those plants are growing full tilt. They soon run out of other things, like nutrients and water and good soil, which are in ever shorter supply. But the plants don't degrade soil, they build it. Plants don't degrade water, they purify it. And when we stand in a shower of rain, we have the plants to thank for that. Cut down enough forests, and the rain disappears. And when the rain disappears, the forests disappear. This is happening in the Amazon at this very moment. Plants save the water. As the world heats up, who is it that creates oases of shade? Who cools our cities' urban heat islands? But the trees, doing sophisticated air conditioning without using a single watt of electricity. They don't ruin the land, they heal the land. They are our teachers of restoration. And oftentimes in the climate debate, again, we focus on technological engineered solutions when the infrastructure that we also need to be investing in is the infrastructure of nature, of the planet's natural ability to store carbon, regulate climate. So much as our climate policies tend to be looking toward engineered solutions, we have to invest in the so-called nature-based solutions as well, of reforestation, of afforestation, of ecosystem restoration. Climate solutions based on natural capital, if you will, are really important, but as it turns out, it's not enough. Because the sad truth is that the carbon budget models tell us we're already past the point when we can rely entirely on forests to reestablish carbon dioxide balance, even if we could protect and invigorate every one of them. We've simply added way too much carbon to the atmosphere and cut down too many forests, so that in the short term we have crippled the planet's ability to respond, which is why the plants can't do it alone. They need us. We not only have to invest in our own individual actions of tree planting, reforestation, restoration, but we also have to understand that our individual acts of addressing climate change are a small fraction of the carbon emissions from institutions and from industry that are fed by federally subsidized reliance on fossil fuels, fed by an economy that incentivizes destruction for private gain over the common good. It's time to imagine a new green economy for the future. And while we do that, heading down the green path in the right direction, we have to remember the teaching of the seventh fire prophecy, that we turn around and retrieve, pick up what was left for us along the ancestors' path. And again, we could do worse than engaging with the traditional indigenous philosophy of learning from the plants. And for me, and maybe for you, one of the really important questions that arises from that is, if we think that the plants are our oldest teachers, how can we be better students? How can we really attend to them and learn what they are sharing with us? Just a few ideas to consider this evening. One of those is, what does the earth ask of us? That we pay attention, that we simply direct our attention to the living world. Ethnobotanists tell us that our great-grandparents knew over 100 plants by name and by use. Of course they did. They grew them in their gardens, they picked them in the woods, but today the average American can identify 100 corporate logos and 10 plants. Is it any wonder that we live in a society that recognizes legal personhood for corporations and no legal standing at all for birch trees or blue jays? Here is a powerful need for system change, when corporations are granted the rights of personhood but living beings are not. We have to change that. Knowing the beings with whom we share the world is also a pathway to recognition of the world as gift. The world seems less like a shopping bag full of commodities and more like a gift when you know the one who gives you the aspirin for your headache. Her name's Willow. She lives up by the pond, and she's a neighbor to Maple, who offers you the gift of syrup on Sunday morning pancakes. Paying attention is a pathway to gratitude and to reciprocity. And naming is not just a matter of respect. It's a powerful tool for transformation. Recognition of personhood for all beings opens the door to ecological justice. Our laws today are all about governing our rights to the land, and the shift we need is to include the rights of the land, the rights to be whole and healthy, the simple right to exist. If we engage our Indigenous teachings, which regard all living beings as persons, we could follow the lead of our Maori brothers and sisters who have worked for decades to have their sacred river declared a person. And just several years ago, the government of Aotearoa of New Zealand recognized the Wanganui River as a legal person. These Indigenous ideas of the personhood of all beings and the respect that they are owed translates to the constitutions of Indigenous-led nations like Ecuador and Bolivia, who have enshrined the rights of nature in their constitutions. To the global movement, again led by Indigenous philosophy, manifest in the Universal UN Declaration on the Rights of Mother Nature, currently before the United Nations, where I had the privilege of addressing the General Assembly a few years ago in support of this declaration. And recognition of personhood takes place not just in international courts, but in our everyday speech. Now I want you to think about this, because most of us in this room probably are speaking English. And it's exciting to think about the ways that new languages and new ways of thinking are emerging out of other languages than English. And of course, in the waves of colonization that swept across Turtle Island, Indigenous languages were nearly obliterated by the acts of not only removal from our homelands, but intentional language erasure in the boarding schools. Healing for the earth, healing for our people is tied up in language. Let me tell you what I mean by this. As English speakers, and you look at these beings for whom we just gave gratitude a few moments ago, how do we speak of that robin, of those strawberries, of that bear, of that maple? We call them it, don't we? Look at it. It's growing in the yard. It's standing by the river. Isn't that interesting? In English, you are either a person or you are an it. Do the thought experiment. What if your grandma, your beloved grandmother, just walked into this room and I said, "Oh, look, it brought cookies." That's really rude, isn't it? I dehumanized her, I objectified her, I reduced her to an object. How do we speak of our beloved grandmother Earth? As it. In English, you are either a person, a human person, or you are a thing. And in a sense, what this linguistic imperialism, the erasure of the indigenous concepts of personhood embedded in our language, is a tool of colonization that sets the living world outside our circle of respect and compassion and personhood. So as a scientist and as a writer, I've been deeply troubled by this. You know, I've spent my whole life sitting at the feet of plants, and when I write about them, I need to call them it if I am going to speak proper English. It feels wrong. Have any of you ever encountered this as well? You just don't want to say it about the living world. And so I was consulting with my language teachers and thinking about our Potawatomi language. Because you know what? In Potawatomi, it's impossible to say it to a blue jay or it to a strawberry. Our language is based on a grammar of animacy. We use the same grammar for squirrels and red foxes and white pine that we do for our auntie or our grandma or our daughter. We speak of the living world with a grammar of family because they are our family. When we speak indigenous languages, we speak of kinship, not of commodity and natural resources. So could we, inspired by this model of animacy, could we give ourselves a way to speak respectfully of the living world in English? And working with a beloved language teacher, I asked him, I said, do we have a word in Potawatomi for just a being of the earth? Not a human being, an unspecified being, but a relative on the earth. And he said, of course we do. That word is Bamadizi Aki. It is a good being of the earth. Now, I had no illusions that the beautiful word Bamadizi Aki was going to slide into English anytime soon. You want to try it? But the last part of that word is Aki, which means the land. And that last little sound, ki. Could we slide that in next to he, she, ki, and it, so that we might say of those maples in the springtime, not I'm gonna go drill it, but ki is giving us the gift of sap this spring. And you know, we'll need a plural as well because we have many, many relatives out there. And one of the ways that we pluralize some kinds of words in Potawatomi is to add an N, which brings us to a familiar word of kin, so that we might speak of our relatives as kin. When those geese are flying overhead tomorrow morning, we could say, our kin are flying south. Have a good trip. We can't wait to see you again in the spring. This notion of kinship in the living world can be transformative. I'll tell you, I was not a kid in an English class who liked diagramming sentences or learning grammar, but I'm convinced that these are the pronouns of the revolution. Among the teachings, there we go, of Native peoples is an antidote to the disrespect that we show for most of the living world, not only in our language, but in the way we interact with the living world. Because if you take seriously this notion that all these natural resources are in fact our kin, they are our relatives, what does that mean when you're going to go pick berries or catch a fish or cut some firewood? It means you are going to be consuming your relative. You're going to be consuming a person. And what does that mean? It means that we have to be very careful how we do that. We can't not consume because sadly we cannot photosynthesize. We are animals, we have to consume. Now, Western tradition navigates this territory really easily. Why? Because we call the world it. It's not a person, it's not a thing, or it's a thing, it's not a relative. So that means we can consume it any old way that we want. But part of the genius of indigenous environmental philosophy is to say we can both hold this notion of the personhood of our kinfolk, our more than human kinfolk, and consume as we must in this circle of reciprocity and giving and taking. And that's where the honorable harvest comes from. It is a both practical and reverent way of taking from the earth. I know many of you have read the book, so I don't want to belabor the notions of the honorable harvest, save to remind you that these teachings govern something as simple as going into a field to pick berries. Do we just go into that field and start picking willy-nilly, filling our basket as quickly as we could? In a commodity organized society, yes, that's exactly what we do. But in the indigenous framework, we follow the honorable harvest. We would never take the first one. It's an inherent practice of restraint, which is a conservation ethic in action, because if you never take the first one, you will never take the last. And if we find the fourth one or the seventh one, whatever your culture dictates, we don't take that either. We ask permission first. We speak to that plant or to that fish and say, do you have enough to share? Will you help me support my family, this medicine, this food for my people? Now, it might seem crazy to you if you came upon me in a field full of strawberries and that lady's crazy, she's talking to those strawberries. But in Potawatomi ways, when the strawberries are our relative, indeed our elder, our respected teacher, it's not crazy, it's just good manners. Because if we take without permission, that's called stealing. And that violates every ethical precept. But we steal from Grandmother Earth all of the time. But if you're going to ask permission, you have to listen for the answer as well. And so many times in this generous world, the answer is yes. Yes, of course, we want you to take these berries, these medicines, these gifts from the earth. But sometimes the answer is no. And if the answer is no, you go home with an empty bucket, with an empty basket, and that's just the way it is, because the world does not belong to us. It belongs to those very beings. If we do get permission, we're told to take only that which we need. And oh, isn't it hard to separate our needs and our wants, particularly in a consumer-driven society? The honorable harvest also tells us to use everything that you take. Don't waste. This is the gift of a life, and it would be an act of great disrespect to waste that life. Be grateful for the gifts that you have been given. Deeply grateful in a way that acknowledges the givers of those gifts far more than just a polite thank you. Minimize harm in the way that you take. Do as little damage as you can. I've been told don't use a shovel if a digging stick will do. And share. Share everything that you've taken, just as those plants have shared with you. Go share this with somebody else who can't get out to pick berries or to cut firewood. Share what the earth gives to us, and then there will be plenty for all. Sorry, there we go. Oh, there it is. And then reciprocate the gift. Always give back in return for what it is that you have been given. Plant gatherers, we always leave a spiritual gift and often a material gift too. Weed around those plants, scatter their seeds. You need to know them well enough to know what would be an appropriate gift for them. How do we care them? That's again why we have to pay attention to them. We give care, we give gratitude, we give ceremony, we give our attention, our respect, we vote, we donate to land trusts. The list is long. And I am told that there is a teaching even older than only take what you need, and it is take only that which has been given to you. It's a very challenging ethical and practical concept to be able to discern what's given to us as opposed to what we take under duress. And I have wrestled with this concept. How do we know what is given to us? And I'm not sure I understand it completely, but I do know that coal from mountaintop removal is not given to us. Tar sands, oil, proposed to vote to move through Line 3 that destroys the land, that is not given to us. Shale gas from hydrofracking that poisons water is clearly not given to us. But the sun's energy is given to us every day. Every day the wind blows, the surf rolls without impediment. These are given to us freely, limitless in supply, although not without their own environmental cost. Take only that which is given is a key part of a sustainable energy policy. Had we lived by the honorable harvest, had we taken only that which was given to us, perhaps we would not today be afraid of our own atmosphere. We need acts of restoration, not only for polluted waters and degraded lands. We need restoration of honor to the way that we live. And the reward is not just a good, feel-good sense of responsibility, it may save our lives. Our economies and our institutions enmesh us all in a profoundly dishonorable harvest. And collectively, by our assent or by our inaction, we have chosen these policies that we live by. But you know what? We can choose again. We can choose reciprocity. We can choose to sustain the lives that sustain our own. And that's the teaching of the plants. There we go, that's the slide I wanted. Think of it, these amazing plant teachers, brilliant, creative, gentle, wise, intelligent, sacred beings who give and give and give. They are trying to help, doing their best to save the world against human folly. They're making forests, soils, food, medicine, and trying to hold back climate change. And instead of showering them with gratitude and respect, we cut them down, dig them up, and poison them in an act of betrayal so profound it threatens the continuity of life. What do you suppose it was going to be like at the moment when people wake up and realize that we have ground our oldest teachers underfoot? I'm going to leave you this evening with a story. A story that I return to again and again for hope and courage in a time of crisis. And I first heard this story from Haudenosaunee elder Tom Porter, sitting at his table at Gonajohalegi when he pulled out a deerskin bag of stones, and he told me about the time when Sky Woman's grandsons, the twins, Flint and Sapling, were in conflict over the future of the beautiful world. About how the struggle between these twin forces of creation and destruction, which are always with us, were to be decided between these brothers in a game. To decide the fate of the world, they decided to match their skills at a game we know today as the Peachstone game. The players use a set of so-called stones, often peach pits. One side has been painted white and the other side is blackened. The player shakes the bowl, tosses the stones into the air, and only when all of the stones have turned the same color would a winner be declared and the fate of the world decided. If all the stones came up black, Flint would prevail and destruction would be loosed upon the world. Should they all fall white, then the world would continue under the generous hand of creation. They played and they played without a winner. They tossed the seeds for hours, back and forth, with every throw. Two boys gambled with the future of the world. Would life continue as we know it, or would all be lost? It's such an ancient story, and yet could not feel more contemporary as we are today gambling with the future of the earth, with the continuity of life. On and on they played all night until the glimmer of light at the eastern horizon warned them that the time was almost up. They could make only one more throw as the pink of dawn colored their faces. The stones flew into the air for the last time and began to clatter one by one into the bowl. The first one came up black, and the next, and the next. All the stones were black until there was only a single seed hanging in the air, tumbling and spinning on its way to the bowl to join the others. All the other beings watched in terror as humans gambled with the continuity of life. And at the moment when all life hung in the balance, it is said that all the members of creation, the trees, the berries, the grasses, the birds, the four-legged, the many-legged, the no-legged, all drew in their breaths as the last stone tumbled. And together, all of creation gave a mighty shout. Its force caused the human foolishness to be overruled, and the power of their voices turned the last stone over as it fell into the dish. The color of trillium blooming in the spring, the color of mother's milk, of moonlit snow, the color of a polar bear. I've tried to imagine the sound of that shout, the roars, the panting, the swishing of grasses. In my imagination, I feel rather than hear their voices, large and small, chirps, hoots, buzzes, howls and flutters, scrapes, squeaks, leaf flutters, needle whispers, spine quivers, buds swelling, seeds bursting, roots pushing, spores popping, and the vibration of the membrane in the smallest microbe, all coalesced in a great wailing wind so cohesive in strength and direction that it stopped the stone, spins it around, holds it poised in midair, and sets it down, life side up. It was the mighty shout of creation that saved the beautiful world. But we are gambling again. The plants, the birds, the salamanders and starfish are all trying to make that mighty shout. But we have weakened them to the point that their voices are threadbare and faint, a raspy whisper that can barely be heard over the bulldozers. At this time, they have stood for us, and we have paid them with betrayal, with our silence as destruction reigns. And now it is we humans who must give the mighty shout. I've tried to imagine what that would sound like, to offer my own primal shout for life. As a scientist and as a writer of the beauty of the earth, I kind of imagined it would sound like the Hallelujah chorus. But to my dismay, what arises from my throat is a wail of anguish at the realization of what we have done, a great cry of shame, a howl of grief for the creation. It surprised me that my shout was this raging no, and not a yes of encouragement to the rest of creation. I confess it scared me at first, but there's wisdom there in understanding that grief is the measure of the depth of love, and love is the material of transformation. Feeling the wounds of the world propels us, because in this time, in order to say yes to creation, we also have to say no to destruction, and resist on behalf of the good green world. And then out of the powerful love we have for the world, raise our voices in the song that will save us. The other beings are waiting for us to join the mighty shout. Mi'u, miigwech. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you.
Robin, thank you. I invite people to come down if you have a question.
Hello, Professor. Can you hear me?
I can. I can.
Can you please give an example of asking for permission and receiving a no answer? Like a real example of that, or maybe something from experience?
Oh, sure. I think implicit in your question is how do we know? How do we listen, right? How do we know what the answer is? And science is one of the great tools for that. We can look around and see whether that population is healthy enough to bear our harvest, for example. And sometimes, plenty of times, I'll look around and say, I don't see any young ones here. This population isn't regenerating itself. To me, that's a no. That's a no that says the population is not growing, and therefore I shouldn't take. But there are also plenty of examples that are of a more intuitive sort. I'm thinking about times when I would go gathering, and there was a certain plant that I wanted, and there was only one. Never take the first one. I think, yeah, but I need it. I really need it. And of course I didn't. I went home with my basket empty. But I dropped something on my way out of the woods. And I thought, darn, where did my trowel go? I got to go back and find that. And in fact, I walked back through the woods, and my trowel had fallen out of my pocket into a big patch of exactly the plant that I needed. So to me, that was a way of understanding, of an answer, no, you shouldn't take this one. But because I respectfully didn't take that one, the other said, here we are.
Hi, I wanted to ask you a little about the concept of net zero. Lots of environmental groups and ostensibly environmentally friendly politicians talk about net zero by some year, and the sooner it is, the better they are. But it seems to me, as best I've been able to discern, that that's about carbon credits from forests they've agreed not to chop down. So I wondered if you could talk, about net zero as a concept, or the commodification of the carbon these forests sequester.
Sure. Thank you for asking that. And it's a huge and, as you know, complicated issue of ecology, economics, political ecology, and in many cases about environmental justice. The notion of net zero, of course, is that we can think about a net zero emissions, which doesn't mean cutting carbon pollution to zero. It means that it's balanced by carbon sequestration and uptake of natural ecosystems, oftentimes particularly forests. So in the carbon credit markets, things like maintaining a existing thriving forest, and there are different formulas for different kinds of forests and their rate of carbon sequestration, can be valued to say, okay, this company says, I'm going to put this number of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Oh, but by the way, I have a forest preserve over here that's going to absorb it. So there's the problematic nature of being able to continue to pollute because of those carbon credits. But the net zero does value the natural infrastructure of the planet as playing a really important role in carbon capture. I'm sorry, it's hard to answer this question. There's such a lag between this mic and what I'm hearing. I hope this is making sense to you. One of the justice pieces, though, that I feel I must mention is that in any number of cases, there are carbon reserves in forests that are being set aside mostly by governments, in which they have displaced Indigenous peoples who are caring for those forests in order to claim carbon credits for those forests. And this is the so-called red problem. And one of the things that is so important is like a UN report that came out, I think it was in 2019, that showed that the only lands on the planet that are not decreasing in biodiversity at a scary rate are those lands that are managed by Indigenous peoples. And so, yeah, it's complicated.
Are there other questions?
Thank you for your talk. I'm a community planner and I work in a lot of rural communities that their main objectives are typically agricultural and open space preservation. And I was just curious if you've been involved in any community planning processes and if there are any regulatory practices or recommendations that you think are particularly effective in maintaining natural systems and that sort of thing.
Well, thanks for asking and for your work in that arena. That's not my arena, so I really don't know about any particulars about those protocols or processes. Safe to say that farmland preservation, open space preservation is again this part of investing in natural capital, right? That we need so badly. And I think in the open space preservation and farmland preservation, we can go one step better into regenerative agriculture and the growing movement toward carbon farming, that there are some fairly straightforward adjustments that we make to so-called land management that can actually sequester far greater rates of carbon sinking into those lands. So I would hope that that too would become part of open space planning. But thank you for your work in that arena.
Thank you.
I think we have time for a couple more.
I want to thank you so much for that wonderful talk. We were at ESF at almost the same time. I graduated in '77.
Hey, Stumpy.
Fellow Stumpy.
Yeah.
Even though they tried to call us female Stumpy Stumpettes, which I always hated. So my question has to do with, because when I read your book and I remember some of the attitudes of professors at the time that I was there. And I don't know if you've retired or if you're still teaching there, but I wondered if they have modernized their views. This sounds like an oxymoron, modernized their views to accept more indigenous people's views on things.
I can answer that very proudly and happily to say that in the very building that you and I probably took classes in, we now have the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment on campus, whose mission is to use both traditional knowledge and scientific knowledge to care for the earth. So yeah, there's a great deal of openness in our students and the courses that we're teaching on indigenous issues and the environment, traditional knowledge of forest management, of decolonizing conservation is at work at ESF as well as other places.
They have, to some extent.
Oh, yeah. There is. Does that mean the work is done? No, it means we have opened the door and put our foot in it. Yeah. And there are loads of students ready to stream through.
Thank you.
Thank you for your book. There's many people like me that have the responsibility for taking care of these forests, acres of it, and it's easy to get foresters in and it's easy to get lumber people. It's hard to find people that share your view, that also have the a technical knowledge as well as respect the spirit of the forest. What's your advice for somebody that's taking care of generations of these places, to where to look for that advice?
Where to look for advice, did you say?
Yeah, who can you trust?
Yourself?
That part I've got down.
Well, one of the interesting outcomes of this notion of private property is that you get to decide. You get to call the shots on how your forest is cared for, i.e. managed. And so managing a forest for values greater than commodity value, for greater than timber value, for the ecosystem services, for the cultural resources, is a growing movement. There's quite a lot of literature about small woodlot management for family values, for example, for cultivating nut trees, for cultivating biodiversity, for cultivating medicines. There's some beautiful work being done right in this area, isn't there, on forest floor restoration to bring back the medicines and so forth, the plants that belong in the forest understory. There's a lot of really good efforts to think differently about the forests. And I'm very serious about that notion of trusting yourself and leading the way. You know, I often think if our institutions and if our political leaders won't lead, then we will. So I hope you'll trust yourself and spread that trust.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more person with a question.
Again, thank you so much for your book and for being here tonight. I'm really short. Sorry, is that better? Thank you so much for being here tonight. My question is about educating our upcoming generations, our children, our children's children, and their ways of knowing and how our culture, what is your advice on helping our culture today move away to, or move to a more way of, different ways of knowing, different ways of teaching? And you mentioned how you're new at your native tongue, if you will, if that makes sense. I had the opportunity while teaching at RIT to befriend somebody who was working on restoring his language at one of the Seneca nations. So I'm just, can you add a little to that for me?
Yes, certainly. Learning a language, and particularly in this case, indigenous languages, I think relevant to your question. One of the most powerful values in that is that it illuminates the assumptions that are present in English and therefore in our own culture. These default options that we live in a world that we name natural resources. What if we called them not natural resources, but earthly gifts? What if we change our language of how we think about the land not as commodity, but as community? There's a great power in this, because as we talk to one another, we question the assumptions. Oh, wait, maybe land isn't all about natural resources. What if we, seriously, if we started calling the world earthly gifts and not natural resources? Doesn't that automatically make you interact with the land in a different way if it's a gift rather than it's a commodity? I often despair, as you probably do too, at my inability to topple Monsanto or the fossil fuel industry. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But I can change my mind, and I can change my language, and I can converse with people so that they change their minds and their stories, and it snowballs. It's this groundswell of change that comes from how we think and how we talk about the living world. But so importantly, I don't know whose quote this is, but in this moment of great urgency, I think we all have to bear in mind that phrase of our silence will not save us. We have to speak up.
Robin, thank you. Let's move to the part of the evening where we get our books signed. So just remind you, if you all will line up in this aisle, and Lift Bridge is still set up outside, so if you don't have a book yet, or if you'd like another book, you can buy a book out this door, and then line up here to have your book signed. Okay, let's hold off just one second.